Hi, everyone. We trust that you are home safe with your family during these challenging times. Today, myself, Jennifer, and Cindy, we wanted to talk about a very common question we get. This question is, how do we protect my inheritance from potential lawsuits? So say one of your parents passed away or both of them passed away and they've given you a significant inheritance. How do you protect it in case that you are sued? And so if you are in a high-risk profession like doctors or a truck driver, you want to make sure that you do some sort of asset protection planning to avoid losing that inheritance that your parents worked so hard to give you. So in today's video, we're going to share with you some of the issues that we see when it comes to this topic, so you can think about it and make sure that you have a plan in place to protect your inheritance. So Cindy, do you want to start us off with the first issue?
Yeah, so first, hopefully your parents were prepared enough to leave you the inheritance through a trust. And if that's the case, then that's a different conversation for another day, a much nicer conversation. But if that's not the case, if it just didn't happen that way, where the money was left outside of a trust and in your name, or you received it through probate, then this is the conversation we're having today, which essentially is we're in the realm of asset protection. Once you receive that inheritance, whatever form it may be, either a home or lump sum cash or insurance proceeds, that cash, that asset is now considered your personal asset. And if it's your personal asset, that means it is now subject to your personal creditors. So if you have creditors coming after you for debt, for whatever debt it is, they now have access to this new inheritance that you've just received. Unfortunately, that is the case. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't do anything about that. If you're not already sued, there's lots of things you can do in order to protect your assets. So, if you haven't been sued, you can do your own estate plan and make sure that that money goes into some type of trust that would protect the asset. You could give away the money right now. You can gift it, your cash, to your spouse or your children in order to avoid any future potential collection or lawsuits. So if you haven't been sued, there's a lot of options. You can turn that liquid asset into something more tangible, perhaps a car, a nice car. But I mean, your creditors can still repossess your car, but the value of that car is much less now that you've driven it off the lot and you've put some miles on it and you've been able to enjoy it. Another really good way to put it, to shelter that money is through some type of educational fund, perhaps, in life insurance, buying life insurance, whatever the means is, you're basically transferring that form into another form that is a little bit harder for potential creditors to reach. And you also want to make sure that you've got good coverage in insurance. So that's one way that will help shield your other assets, by buying enough insurance. So either that's car insurance or personal liability insurance or property insurance, whatever the case is, you want to make sure that your insurance is high enough that it'll cover any potential liability in the future, so that your personal assets are then not available for creditors.
Yeah, and that's a good thing that Cindy mentioned. If you haven't been sued, there still are a lot of avenues and options that you can take. But just keep in mind, not all trusts have asset protection capabilities. So, a revocable living trust would not shield you from creditors because the assets that you put in this type of revocable living trust, they're still yours. They're still under your control, under your own social security number. So in case a creditor is to go after you for any sort of liability, they would still be able to take certain assets out of your living trust. So the revocable living trust would not be able to shield you from these type of creditors. But if you were to set up an irrevocable living trust, then that would have an asset protection mechanism to it, because for an irrevocable living trust, your asset that you fund is no longer under your own social security number. The irrevocable living trust has its own tax ID. So essentially, once you put your asset into this irrevocable living trust, it really is no longer yours, because number one, it's not under your own social security number. So if somebody sues you, they do an asset search under your, numbers, and it's not going to show up anymore. And then number two is that, the asset that you put into an irrevocable living trust is being managed by somebody else and not you. So essentially, you have no control over this asset anymore. So along the lines of asset protection, it's a good thing because, creditors cannot obtain those assets anymore. However, on the other flip side of it is that you basically lost control of that asset, even though, you can name your children or your family members back in as a beneficiary. Ultimately, that asset will come back to your family. But basically, during your own lifetime, you would have limited access to that asset. And so, that's how the asset protection part of it comes into play, because you're able to, protect it in a way that you don't have control over it, but maybe your children or your designated beneficiaries, they will have access to it at some point. So that's always an option. And, irrevocable living trust, there's a lot more to consider, a lot more kind of things to think about. And in the long run, because you do lose certain control over that asset, you really do need to make sure that that's something that you really need. If you are higher risk in terms of being sued, or that a creditor is going to come in shortly in the future, then it would make sense to consider this type of asset protection to ultimately make sure that that asset still does remain within the family sometime in the future. But as of right now, then the creditors would not be able to access that. Another thing is, if you took that money that you inherited and you purchased a home, and then sometime in the future you got sued, then that home, you can claim a homestead exemption in California. And so that can actually exempt you up to about $75,000 that would be protected from creditors. So that's always an option, as Cindy mentioned, kind of converting what you inherited into different forms. So if you inherited a sum of cash, you may be able to purchase a home. At least at $75,000 of that would be exempt from creditors.
Yeah, so as you can see, there's so many different options to protect your inheritance from potential lawsuits. And there's really no one-size-fits-all model. And so our recommendation is to look at your risk factor and weigh the pros and the cons of specific asset protection strategies that are available to you. Because some strategies may or may not be favorable to your lifestyle. If you want more control, obviously an irrevocable trust is not an option. So regardless, talk to an attorney before receiving your inheritance, if you are expecting one, because as attorneys, we can do a lot more to how to best protect it if you haven't received it yet, and if you haven't claimed that inheritance yet. So talk to us. We offer free consultations. And we are estate planning attorneys here in Los Angeles. So especially during this pandemic, we're open remotely, and we can definitely help you in this time of need. So if you have any other questions about asset protection, living trusts, or receiving your inheritance, let us know, and we'd be happy to speak to you. So in the meantime, please stay safe. Continue delivering hope for your family and for your community, and we'll see you in the next video.